On a frigid winter night in Chicago, amidst a dark and deserted alley, Michael, a dedicated police officer, discovers two thin twin girls rummaging through a trash can for food. This heartbreaking scene not only leaves him stunned, but also sets him on a challenging and emotional journey. From battling societal prejudices to conflicts with his fiance, Michael faces the biggest question of all. Does he have the capability and strength to save these innocent children who need him more than anyone else? His small action in that fateful moment opens up an inspiring story, a journey that forever changes the lives of three people. Don't miss the touching and dramatic details as Michael steps into a role he never imagined, becoming the reluctant father of two girls who were once forgotten by the world. Follow this inspiring story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so we can share more meaningful stories like this. We'd love to know where you're watching from, so please share in the comments. That night, Michael finished his late shift at the Chicago Police Department. It was the coldest part of winter, with biting winds cutting through his skin, seeping through every layer of his clothing. He chose to walk home, partly to relax after a stressful day, and partly to enjoy the rare quiet of the city. The streets were deserted, the faint yellow streetlights casting dim shadows on the wet sidewalks. His mind wandered in thought until an unusual sound broke the silence. It was a soft rustling, as if someone was rummaging through the trash. Michael stopped and listened more closely. He thought it was just a stray cat, but then another sound froze him in place, the faint sobbing of children. Goosebumps rose on his neck. How could there be children in this place at this hour? A sense of worry surged within him, urging him to step into the nearby alley. The deeper he walked, the weaker the streetlights became, and darkness seemed to swallow everything. But then, under the dim yellow light, Michael saw a sight that made his heart tighten. Two twin girls, about 5 or 6 years old, were kneeling beside a large trash can. One girl, the older one, was hunched over, searching through the garbage. The other stood back, her wide eyes alert, clutching a torn cloth tightly in her hand. Both were emaciated, their faces gaunt, and their eyes filled with exhaustion, as if they were used to living in constant caution and hunger. Their clothes were tattered and dirty, their bare feet muddy and red from the cold. Their naturally curly hair was greasy and tangled, as if they hadn't been cared for in days. Michael stopped, not daring to approach immediately. He didn't want to scare the girls. In the dim light, he saw the older girl holding a moldy piece of bread from the trash can, bringing it to her nose to smell. Looking closer, he realized both girls were thin, their faces hollow, and their eyes full of fatigue, as if they were accustomed to living with caution and hunger. Slowly, Michael sat down, trying to keep his voice as gentle as possible. "Hey kids, I'm a police officer. You don't need to be afraid. I just want to help." As soon as his voice echoed, the older girl jumped, pulling her sister back a few steps, her eyes full of fear. "Don't come near. We don't want to be caught," the girl yelled, her voice trembling. Michael raised both hands, trying to reassure them. "I'm not going to arrest you. I just want to help. You're hungry, right?" Lila, the younger girl, looked up at her sister and whispered, "Should we trust him?" Leah, the older girl, stared at Michael for a long time, her face a mix of fear and suspicion. But Michael's eyes, the sincerity and warmth in them, seemed to calm her. Finally, Leah nodded slightly. Michael slowly took out a granola bar he always carried in his coat pocket while on duty and placed it on the ground in front of the girls. "Here, eat this first," he said, stepping back to make them feel safer. Leah carefully approached, holding the granola bar with her thin, shaky hands. She didn't eat it herself, but handed it to her sister first. Lila quickly broke off a small piece and chewed it voraciously. Leah remained standing, her eyes still wary as she looked at Michael, but now she was less afraid. "I can take you to a safe place," Michael said, trying to keep his voice as gentle as possible. "You don't have to stay here anymore." Leah looked at him, hesitation evident on her small face. "Officer, where will you take us?" Michael knelt down, keeping his eyes at eye level with the girl. "To a place where you don't have to worry about food or the cold. I promise." Suddenly, Lila spoke up softly, almost whispering, "We don't want to go back to the orphanage." Her words stabbed Michael's heart. He didn't know what these children had been through, but it was clear they had lived in fear and hurt. Without hesitation, Michael called for an ambulance. While waiting for the vehicle to arrive, he brought the girls into his patrol car to keep them warm. Michael took off his coat and draped it over the shivering girls. Leah glanced up, her tiny voice barely audible. "Thank you, officer." Michael smiled, feeling a strange surge within him, a connection, a strong urge to protect. When the ambulance arrived, Michael sat with the girls on the way to the hospital. He held Leah's small hand, feeling the coldness and weakness in it. He whispered, "I won't let anyone hurt you anymore. I promise." Both Leah and Lila didn't say anything, just looked at him, their eyes seeming to hold a glimmer of hope. On the way, Michael realized this wasn't just a case to be handled for the night. Deep down, he knew his life was about to change forever. The ambulance sped through Chicago's quiet streets, red and blue lights sweeping across the empty road. Michael sat in the back seat, between the two girls who were shivering from the cold. Leah sat close to the window, still holding tightly to the coat he had placed over her shoulders. Lila, the younger one, curled up next to Michael, her small hands clutching his as if he was the only support in her shattered world. Michael leaned down, his voice gentle but firm. "It's okay. You'll be all right. I'm here." Leah looked up at him, her large brown eyes still wary. She didn't say anything, but his presence seemed to ease her tension. Lila whispered softly, almost like a breath, "We won't go back to the streets, right?" The question pierced Michael's heart. He knew that behind her words was a deep fear, a fear that no child should ever have. "I promise," he said, his eyes filled with determination. "No one will hurt you anymore." When they arrived at the hospital, the medical team was ready to receive them. The girls were quickly taken to the emergency room, and Michael followed closely behind. He looked around, never taking his eyes off Leah and Lila, his heart filled with constant worry. Both girls were placed on hospital beds, and the nurse's movements seemed to glide slowly before him. A doctor approached him, holding a chart. "The girls are in very weak condition," he said, his voice both serious and empathetic. "The older girl is severely malnourished and dehydrated. The younger one is no better, and she has some external wounds, possibly from scratches or bruises." Michael nodded, trying to keep his voice calm. "They'll be okay, right?" "We'll do everything we can," the doctor replied. "But it's clear they've been living in extremely poor conditions for a long time. Luckily, you found them in time. Otherwise, I can't guarantee the outcome." Those words left Michael speechless. The image of the two girls kneeling by the trash can, searching for food like ghosts, kept resurfacing in his mind. He looked through the glass into the examination room, where Leah and Lila were being checked. They looked so small and fragile that he couldn't imagine how they had survived. A while later, a nurse invited Michael into the room. Leah was sitting on the bed, leaning against it, her eyes still wary but no longer as tense as before. She looked at Michael as he entered, saying nothing, just watching his every step. Lila lay on the adjacent bed, asleep from exhaustion. Michael pulled up a chair next to Leah's bed, sat down, and gently asked, "How are you feeling?" Leah looked down at her hands, her voice a whisper. "We're okay. It's just, we don't want to go back to the orphanage." Her words stabbed Michael's heart. He knew these children had endured more than he could ever imagine. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "I promise I'll find a safe place for you. No one will hurt you anymore." Leah looked up at him, her eyes full of doubt mixed with hope. "You promise?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I promise," Michael affirmed, his eyes unwavering. Leah didn't say anything more, but she nodded slightly. Michael could see that, even if just a little, she was starting to trust him. That night, Michael didn't leave the hospital. He sat beside Leah's bed, his eyes never leaving her. While Lila slept soundly, Michael noticed Leah couldn't sleep. She lay still, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, her gaze filled with worries that no child her age should ever have. "Are you okay, Leah?" Michael asked softly, leaning down to look at her. Leah shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. We don't want to bother you. If you take us, we'll be good. We won't cause trouble." Michael was stunned by her words. He couldn't imagine that at her age, Leah had to think of herself as a burden. He took her hand, feeling her small, cold, trembling hands in his. "Leah, you and Lila are not a burden," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I want to help you because you deserve to be helped. You're not bothering anyone." For the first time, Michael saw tears in Leah's eyes. She didn't cry loudly, just let the tears quietly flow down her thin cheeks. Michael gently wiped them away, feeling a deeper urge within him than ever before. All night, Michael stayed by the girls' beds. He sat there, watching Lila's steady breathing and Leah's small movements. He didn't know what awaited him, but he understood one thing clearly. His life had changed forever. The next morning, when Leah opened her eyes, she saw Michael still sitting there. He gave her a gentle smile, his eyes full of kindness. For the first time, Leah smiled back. It was a very small smile, but to Michael, it was like the first rays of sunshine after a long storm. The next morning, Michael left the hospital feeling heavy-hearted. The cold wind cut through his layers of clothing, but he barely noticed. In his mind were the images of Leah and Lila, two small, fragile girls, completely dependent on his protection. He knew his life had changed forever from the moment he heard their cries in that dark alley. On his way home, Michael stopped at a familiar coffee shop. He needed time to think, to find answers to the big question in his heart. What would he do next? Ordering a black coffee, he sat near the window, his hand wrapped around the hot cup, eyes fixed on the sparse traffic outside. But his mind wasn't there. He thought about Leah and Lila, the wariness in Leah's eyes, how she constantly protected her sister, and Lila's shy yet hopeful gaze. He took out his phone, hesitated for a moment, and then called Monica, his fiance. Monica was the woman he loved and planned to marry next year. They had discussed their future, buying a house, building a family, and living a stable life. Michael believed she would understand and support him in this decision. Monica answered after a few rings, her voice still sleepy. "Michael, where are you? I thought you'd be home by last night." Michael slowly explained. He recounted the story from the beginning, finding the two girls in the trash can, taking them to the hospital, sitting by their beds all night, listening to the fears and hurts they had endured. He felt the silence on the other end, and when he finished, Monica didn't say anything for a long moment. "I know this hurts you," Monica finally said, "but you did the right thing. You took them to the hospital. The doctors and social workers will handle the rest." Michael leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He knew Monica was right in some ways, but deep inside it wasn't enough. "Monica," he said, his voice lowering, I want to adopt them." Those words hit like a bomb, shattering the quiet atmosphere between them. Monica took a deep breath. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice lost. "I want to adopt Leah and Lila," Michael repeated, this time clearer and more resolute. "They have no one else. I can't let them go back to the streets or be sent to the orphanage." "Michael," Monica said, her voice turning icy, "do you know what you're saying? These are strangers you just met last night. We're not ready to be parents, let alone adopt." "I know it sounds crazy," Michael replied, trying to keep his voice calm, "but I feel a connection with them, Monica. I can't explain it, but I know I have to do this." Monica laughed, but the laugh was cold and bitter. "A connection? Michael, this isn't a movie. This is real life. Do you know how complicated and expensive adopting a child is? Not to mention, we already have our plans. We were going to buy a house, get married, and build our own family. Do you want to throw it all away just for two girls you met last night?" Michael sat in silence. He understood Monica was worried, but she couldn't feel what he was feeling. "Monica, I'm not throwing anything away. But Leah and Lila have no one else. They've been abandoned and hurt. I can't turn my back on them." Monica angrily exhaled through the phone. "What about me, Michael? What about us? I didn't sign up for this. I don't want my life to be turned upside down because of your impulsive decision." "This isn't impulsive, Monica," Michael almost shouted, unable to hold back. "I can't sleep peacefully knowing I left them there, knowing I could do something but didn't." "Michael," Monica said, her voice cold and sharp, "I'm not sure I can be with someone who always thinks about others more than us." Her words stabbed straight into his heart. Then there was a long silence. Monica said nothing more, and Michael didn't know what to say. Finally, Monica sighed softly. "I need time," she said. "I'll call you back later." Then she hung up. Michael sat there, feeling an emptiness envelop him. He knew Monica was angry, and perhaps she wouldn't change her mind. But deep down, he also knew he had made his decision. He couldn't abandon Leah and Lila, no matter the cost. In the afternoon, Michael returned to the hospital. As he entered the room, he saw Leah and Lila sitting on the bed, playing with an old teddy bear that Nurse Carla had given them. Leah turned around when she saw him, a light smile appearing on her face. "You're back," she said, her voice filled with surprise and a hint of relief. Michael sat down beside the bed, looking at the sisters. "I promised," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Leah silently looked at him, her large brown eyes scrutinizing. "Where will you take us?" she asked, her voice as soft as a passing breeze. "If you take us, we won't bother you. We'll be good." Michael leaned down, his eyes gentle. "You'll never bother me, Leah," he said, his voice warm. "You deserve to be loved and protected. I want you to know that." For the first time, Leah genuinely smiled. She nodded, and in that moment, Michael knew he would fight to the end to protect Leah and Lila. He didn't know what difficulties awaited him, Monica, the legal system, or even objections from others, but he was ready to face them. Because now, he wasn't just a police officer. He was someone who would do everything to provide a better life for Leah and Lila. Michael sat in his small apartment, the morning light streaming through the window, but his mind wasn't on the view outside. He had just returned from the hospital after a long night beside Leah and Lila, and now his head was filled with thoughts. How could he carry out the decision he had made? The adoption process for 2 girls was not simple, and he knew that. But deep in his heart, he had no other choice. Leah and Lila needed him, and he needed them. Michael turned on his computer and began searching for information about adopting children. Documents appeared on the screen, ranging from legal requirements to the family assessment process. He carefully took notes on each step and condition, from proving financial stability to attending psychological counseling sessions. Every step felt like a mountain to climb, but Michael remained undeterred. Finally, he picked up the phone and called the social services office, his voice deep and resolute. "This is Michael Thompson. I'd like to start the process of adopting 2 little girls." On the other end of the line, a warm female voice responded. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm Mrs. Peterson, the caseworker assigned to your file. Can you come in tomorrow afternoon to discuss the details?" Michael agreed immediately, his heart pounding. This would be the first step of a long journey, but he was ready to begin. The next afternoon, Michael walked into the social services office. The small room was simply decorated with photos of children and happy families on the walls. Sitting behind the desk was Mrs. Peterson, a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair and sharp yet warm eyes. "Mr. Thompson, please have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair in front of her. Michael sat down, feeling slightly tense. Mrs. Peterson studied him for a long moment, as if evaluating him. Finally, she spoke. "You understand that adoption is not an easy decision, right? Especially in your case." "Yes, I do," Michael replied, his voice steady. "But I've thought it through carefully. Leah and Lila have no one else. I can't let them go back into the system where no one truly cares about them." Adoption isn't just about saving children, Mr. Thompson. It's a lifelong commitment. You'll need to prove that you have the financial means, time, and a stable environment to raise these 2 girls. You'll also need to attend psychological counseling and undergo a family assessment. Your job, a police officer, will be scrutinized closely because it's a dangerous profession with irregular hours. Have you considered all of these factors? Michael took a deep breath, looking directly at Mrs. Peterson. "I understand what I'm up against, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes. Leah and Lila have suffered enough. I can't let them continue to be hurt." Mrs. Peterson nodded, jotting down a few notes in her notebook. "All right, we'll begin the assessment process. You'll need to complete all the paperwork, attend interviews, and prepare your home. Additionally, we require you to attend parenting classes. This won't be an easy path, but if you're serious, we'll support you." Michael nodded. "I'll do everything." In the following days, Michael dove into the adoption process with determination. He filled out each form, gathered all necessary documents, and attended interviews with social workers. Each time he spoke about why he wanted to adopt Leah and Lila, about the connection he felt from the moment he first met them. One day, after returning from a counseling session, Michael received a call from the hospital. On the other end was Carla, the nurse in charge of Leah and Lila. "Michael, the girls are doing much better now," Carla said. "But Leah asked me this morning if you were coming back. I think you should come as soon as possible." Michael felt his heart tighten. He hurriedly drove to the hospital. When he entered the room, Leah was sitting on the bed, clutching the teddy bear Carla had given her. Lila was sitting on the adjacent bed, playing with a colored pencil. When she saw him, Leah looked up, her eyes brightening a bit. "Uncle is back," the girl said, her voice filled with surprise mixed with relief. Michael smiled and sat down beside the bed. "I promised, remember? I'm not going anywhere." Leah remained silent for a moment, watching him intently. "Do you really want to keep us, Uncle?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Michael took her hand, his eyes gentle yet firm. "Yes, Leah. I want you and Lila to have a family, and I'll do everything to make that happen." Leah didn't say anything else, but she nodded softly, and for the first time, a genuine smile appeared on her small face. As Michael continued the adoption process, he also faced challenges from society. At the police station, rumors began to spread. One afternoon, as he entered the break room, he heard two colleagues, Daniel and Harris, talking. "I don't understand why he's doing this," Daniel said. "Adopting two kids in his situation? He's just making things harder for himself." Harris added, "Not to mention, they're two black girls. A white police officer adopting black children? Did he think about how others would react?" Michael walked in, his eyes cold as he looked at them. "Do you guys have a problem with me trying to help these two kids?" Daniel stumbled, scratching his head. "No, I was just curious. I don't think it's an easy decision." Michael responded, his voice firm. "Yes, it's not easy, but it's the right thing to do, and I won't let anyone stand in my way." Despite the difficulties, Michael didn't give up. Every day he visited the hospital to see Leah and Lila. He told them about the things he was preparing at home: a bunk bed, books, and stuffed animals. One evening, as he sat by Leah's bed, she took his hand, her eyes full of trust. "You promised you wouldn't leave, right?" Michael bent down, holding her hand tightly. "Never, Leah. I'll always be here with you." In that moment, Michael knew that no matter how challenging the journey ahead, he would fight to the end. Not only because Leah and Lila needed him, but because they had become a family he couldn't live without. 2 months after starting the adoption process, Michael received an important call from the social services office. Mrs. Peterson, the caseworker handling his file, informed him that he had passed the initial approval stage and was allowed to bring Leah and Lila home under a temporary foster care arrangement. This was the final step before he could officially become their legal father. Upon hearing the news, Michael felt a mix of joy and anxiety. His life was about to change in ways he had never imagined, and now he was responsible not only for himself, but also for 2 children. But deep down, he knew this was something he had prepared for a long time. The day Leah and Lila were discharged from the hospital, Michael arrived early, bringing a small bunch of balloons and the 2 stuffed animals he had carefully chosen. Carla, the nurse who had been closely involved with the girls, stood waiting for him in the hallway, her eyes both emotional and wistful. "You did it, Michael," Carla said, smiling. These girls have bonded with you more than anyone else. I believe you'll be wonderful fathers." Michael shook Carla's hand, feeling his throat tighten. "Thank you, Carla. I promise I'll do everything to make them happy." At that moment, Leah and Lila walked out of the hospital room. Leah tightly held her sister's hand, but her eyes lit up when she saw Michael. Lila was still a bit hesitant, but when she saw him holding the stuffed animal, she gave a small smile. "Are we really going with you?" Leah asked, her voice wavering as if she couldn't quite believe it. Michael knelt down to her eye level. "Not Uncle, Leah. From now on, call me Dad. We're going home." Leah stood still for a long moment, then suddenly hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, her voice small but full of emotion. Michael took the two girls to his apartment, where he had meticulously prepared over the past weeks. He had spent all his free time creating a cozy little room just for Leah and Lila. The new bunk bed, cartoon-themed bedding, a colorful play corner, and a small bookshelf filled with fairy tales. All were prepared with the hope of making the girls feel loved and safe. When they entered the room, Lila froze, her eyes wide as she looked around as if she couldn't believe it was real. Leah didn't say anything either, her eyes scanning every detail of the room. After a moment, Lila spoke, her voice shaky. "Is this our room?" Michael sat down, gently nodding. "Yes, this is your room. This is our home." Lila turned to Leah, then suddenly ran to hug Michael's legs tightly. "I've never had a room like this," she murmured softly, her voice trailing off. Leah stood beside them, looking at Michael with eyes full of emotion. She gently asked, "Dad, do you really want to keep us?" Michael placed his hand on her shoulder, his eyes gentle but certain. "I don't just want to keep you. I want you to be my family, and I promise I'll always be here for you." In the first few days at home, Leah and Lila couldn't fully relax. They still carried the habits and fears from their previous lives on the streets. Lila often woke up startled in the middle of the night, crying for her sister. Michael would sit by the bed, comforting her, singing lullabies or simply holding her hand until she fell asleep. Leah, though stronger, still had moments where she would withdraw into a corner, her eyes filled with worry. One time, Michael found her hiding a few dry breadcrumbs under her pillow. When he gently asked why, Leah gave a feeble excuse. "What if there's no food tomorrow?" Michael bent down, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Leah, you don't have to worry about that anymore. I promise, our home will always have food. You'll never go hungry again." His words seemed to soothe Leah. She nodded slightly, and from then on, Michael noticed that she began to trust him more. However, balancing work and fatherhood wasn't easy. As a police officer, Michael often had to work irregular hours and sometimes leave the house before Leah and Lila woke up. To ensure the girls were always well cared for, he enlisted the help of Mrs. Johnson, a kind elderly neighbor. Mrs. Johnson, a retired nurse, immediately agreed when she heard Michael's story. "You're a wonderful father, Michael, but no one can do this alone. I'll help you when you need it." She helped him look after Leah and Lila whenever he had to work, and even taught him a few tips for caring for young children, like how to make simple snacks the girls loved. With her support, Michael felt more confident in his new role. Gradually, Leah and Lila began to adjust to their new lives. Their initial fears faded, replaced by curiosity and joy. One day, when Michael came home, he saw Leah teaching Lila how to write her name on a piece of paper. Lila had misspelled Lila as Leah, and Leah burst into laughter. It was the first time Michael had seen them laugh so genuinely since he met them. Every evening, Michael spent time telling stories to the girls before bedtime. Sometimes he read fairy tales from books, other times he shared childhood memories. Leah and Lila listened attentively, their eyes shining in the warm light. One night, as the story ended, Leah softly said, "Dad, we never thought we'd have a place to call home. Thank you for not abandoning us." Michael looked into her eyes, feeling deep trust. He smiled and bent down to kiss her forehead. "No, Leah, I have to thank you. You've brought meaning into my life." Life with Leah and Lila wasn't easy, but it was filled with irreplaceable moments of happiness. Michael realized that his journey was just beginning, but he was ready to face everything, because now Leah and Lila weren't just his responsibility. They were his family, his life, and his most cherished future. As time passed, Leah and Lila became more integrated into their new lives with Michael. His small home was no longer quiet, but always filled with laughter, lively conversations, and warm moments. From the challenging early days to when the three of them truly became a family, the journey not only changed Leah and Lila's lives, but also forever changed Michael. The day Michael took Leah and Lila to the nearby preschool was a significant milestone. That morning, he woke up early to prepare everything meticulously. He packed 2 lovely little lunch boxes, each containing a short but loving note. "Dad is always proud of you." Leah, as strong as ever, tightly held Lila's hand as she led her sister through the school gates. But Michael noticed the small hands trembling. He knelt down, placing his hand on Leah's shoulder, and looked directly into her eyes. "Leah, you can do this. I'll be here waiting for you. After school, we'll go home together, okay?" Leah looked at him intently, her eyes a mix of fear and hope. After a moment, she nodded. "Yes, Dad," she replied softly, then pulled her sister's hand and walked into the classroom. Michael stood there, watching the small figures gradually disappear behind the door, feeling both proud and anxious. He knew Leah had always taken on the responsibility of protecting her sister, and now she was learning to trust a new world where she didn't have to worry about everything on her own. The following months were a period of significant change for Leah and Lila. From shy, timid girls, both gradually became happier and more confident. Lila, once reserved and quiet, began to smile more. She often shared little stories from school with Michael about new friends and the pride she felt when her teacher praised her first drawing. Leah became more mature, sometimes helping Michael tidy the house, preparing snacks, and even reading stories to her sister before bedtime. However, Michael noticed that Leah still carried hidden worries. She always tried to do everything perfectly, as if fearing that if she made a mistake, this peaceful life would disappear. One evening, while Leah was washing dishes after dinner, Michael called her over and sat down beside her. "Leah, you know you don't have to do everything, right? You just need to be yourself. That's enough for me." Leah was silent for a long moment, her eyes downcast. Then, unexpectedly, she asked, "If we misbehave, Dad, will you abandon us?" The question choked Michael. He hugged her tightly, his voice gentle but full of emotion. "Never, Leah. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. I love you just the way you are." After that day, Leah gradually let go of her worries. She smiled more and sometimes even let Michael take care of her instead of always trying to do things herself. the two girls began to enjoy a childhood they had never had before. At the police station, the initial gossip about Michael's decision began to die down, replaced by recognition and admiration from his colleagues. One day, while Michael was working, Sergeant O'Reilly approached his desk. The man who had once doubted him now looked at him differently. "Thompson," he said, his voice still rough but softer, "I didn't think you could do it. But now I see you're truly a good father. I don't know anyone else who could do what you're doing." Michael nodded, feeling the acknowledgement he hadn't realized he needed. Despite ongoing challenges, he knew he was on the right path. One beautiful morning, Michael received a call from the social services office. His adoption file had been officially approved. Leah and Lila were no longer just the girls he cared for. They were now his legal daughters. That day, Michael threw a small party at home to celebrate. Mrs. Johnson, the kind neighbor, along with a few close colleagues, attended. Leah and Lila wore new dresses, their eyes shining with happiness. During the party, Leah unexpectedly stood up, looking at Michael with sparkling eyes. "Dad, we used to think no one needed us, but now we know we have a family, and we're grateful for that." Michael couldn't hold back his tears. He walked over and hugged the two girls tightly, feeling the love and bond he had never imagined he would have. In the years that followed, Leah and Lila grew up surrounded by Michael's love and protection. He taught them how to ride bikes, cook, and was always there for every important milestone in their lives. Leah became a strong and determined girl, often playing the lead role in school plays. Lila had an artistic inclination, spending hours drawing colorful pictures. One evening, as the three of them sat on the couch, Leah suddenly asked, "Dad, do we tire you out?" Michael laughed, pulling both girls closer. "You're not just my pride and joy. You're everything to me. I love you more than anything in the world." Leah and Lila looked at him and hugged him tightly. In that moment, Michael realized that not only had he saved Leah and Lila from a tragic situation, but they had also saved him. They brought him faith, hope, and a sense of purpose he never knew he needed. Their journey continued, but Michael knew he would always be ready to face any challenge. Because now, he had Leah and Lila, a family he had built with all his heart. Michael, Leah, and Lila's journey is a living testament that family is not defined by blood, but by love, compassion, and sacrifice. From a cold winter night in a dark alley to warm days filled with laughter in a home, Michael didn't just save two children. Leah and Lila gave him a new purpose and a happiness he had never known. Their story reminds us that every small act of compassion can change someone's life, or even their entire world. Leah and Lila had once lived in the darkness of neglect, but thanks to Michael's love, they found light, a home, and a brighter future. This journey is not just about adoption or fatherhood. It's a call for us to listen, care, and act when someone needs help. Each of us can become a Michael to someone, a person who brings hope, trust, and the opportunity to change a life. If this story has touched your heart, please help spread the message of love and sharing. Hit the subscribe button, share this story with friends and family, so we can collectively spread more good things in life. Thank you for watching. Remember, in a world full of challenges, just one small act from the heart can create a miracle.